Look at her. Is that a 10-year-old dress from a department store clearance rack? Who let the help into the reception? The cruel laughter rippled through the opulent ballroom like poison, cutting through the classical quartet's melody. Eleanor Bennett froze mid-step, champagne flute trembling in her hand as the group of designer-clad wedding guests openly mocked her simple blue dress. The bride's cousin, Victoria, hadn't bothered to lower her voice. I heard she's some childhood friend of the groom's family, probably cleaning houses for a living. How embarrassing to show up like that. Eleanor's cheeks burned as she felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The wedding planner, mistaking her for catering staff, had already tried to direct her to the service entrance twice. But what happened next silenced the entire ballroom. The best man stepped forward, microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce someone special. Eleanor Bennett, CEO of Bennett Innovations and one of Forbes' most influential entrepreneurs. Eleanor not only donated the venue for today's celebration, but has just pledged $50 million to the Children's Hospital, the newlywed support. And yes, that modest dress she's wearing is the same one she wore when she signed her first $1 million contract. A reminder of where she came from. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor as the room erupted in gasps. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about unexpected twists of fate and powerful comeuppance, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much. And let's continue. 6 months earlier, Eleanor Bennett sat in her modest apartment, staring at her laptop screen. A notification had popped up, an electronic invitation to James Richardson's wedding. James, her childhood neighbor, and the boy who defended her when others mocked her second-hand clothes. Now he was marrying into one of the country's wealthiest families. Eleanor hadn't seen James in nearly 15 years. Not since she left their small town with nothing but determination and a business idea that everyone said would fail. Looking at the invitation, memories flooded back of struggle, ridicule, and the burning desire to prove everyone wrong. Will you be attending, Ms. Bennett? Her assistant's voice broke through her thoughts. Eleanor glanced around her apartment. Despite her net worth approaching $4 billion, she lived simply. No mansion, no luxury cars. Her wealth was invested in her company, in charitable foundations, and in helping others like herself, those with brilliant ideas but without the privilege of connections or inherited wealth. Yes, Eleanor decided, I will attend. She hadn't spoken to James in years, but his family had been kind to her when kindness was rare. His mother had fed her when her own mother worked double shifts. His father had taught her basic carpentry when her own had abandoned them. She owed them this courtesy. What Eleanor didn't expect was the message that followed the invitation. James wanted to speak with her urgently. When they met at a quiet cafe, James looked exhausted. Designer clothes couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the tension in his shoulders. The wedding venue fell through, he explained. Caroline's family is furious. Her father had promised a spectacular venue through his connections, but there was some financial dispute. Now, 3 months before the wedding, we have nowhere. Eleanor listened, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. What about Hampton Gardens, the estate overlooking the bay? James laughed bitterly. Impossible. This book's solid for years. Besides, it costs a fortune. I could help, Eleanor said quietly. James looked up, confusion evident. Eleanor, I appreciate it, but Hampton Gardens is owned by some reclusive tech billionaire. No one can just call and book it. Eleanor smiled slightly. I know the owner quite well. What Eleanor didn't reveal was that she was the reclusive owner. She had purchased Hampton Gardens 3 years ago as an investment property, hosting only exclusive charitable events there. Consider it my wedding gift, she said. James's eyes widened. Are you serious? Cow. Let's just say I've done well for myself. Better than our old town might have expected from that poor Bennett girl. James had the decency to look embarrassed. No one thought that. We both know that's not true. Eleanor cut him off gently. But it doesn't matter now. I want to help. Let me do this. What Eleanor didn't realize was that by offering Hampton Gardens, she was stepping into a world she had deliberately avoided, the world of old money, social hierarchies, and people whose worth was measured by their last name rather than their character. In the months leading up to the wedding, Eleanor worked remotely as usual. Few in her company knew her face. She preferred it that way. Her innovations spoke for themselves. Her wealth accumulated quietly. She donated anonymously. She lived modestly by choice, remembering too well what it felt like to have nothing. The day of the wedding arrived, and Eleanor chose her outfit carefully. The blue dress, simple, elegant, and deeply meaningful to her. She'd worn it 10 years ago when she signed the contract that changed everything. It wasn't designer. It wasn't expensive. But it was her talisman, her reminder. Her assistant had raised an eyebrow. "You're attending a high society wedding at your own estate, and that's what you're wearing?" Eleanor smiled. "Exactly." Upon arriving at Hampton Gardens, Eleanor immediately sensed something was wrong. The security staff, her staff, didn't recognize her. The wedding planner intercepted her at the entrance. "Excuse me, the service entrance is around back," the planner said dismissively. "I'm Eleanor Bennett, a guest," she explained calmly. The planner looked skeptical, eyeing Eleanor's simple dress and lack of ostentatious jewelry. "Your name's not on my VIP list. Regular guests are being seated in the garden." Rather than argue, Eleanor complied. She hadn't come to cause a scene. She spotted James's parents and headed their way, only to be intercepted by Caroline's mother, Mrs. Ashton Pierce. "You must be one of James's hometown friends," she said, the pause deliberate and cutting. "How quaint that you could make it, though perhaps someone should have explained the dress code." Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Ashton Pierce was swept away by other guests, leaving Eleanor standing alone. She didn't mind. She was used to being underestimated. What she hadn't expected was the open hostility. During the reception, the whispers grew louder. Victoria, Caroline's cousin, was particularly vocal, gathering a group of friends who glanced Eleanor's way and laughed behind jeweled hands. Eleanor caught snippets. "Clearance rack, charity case. Doesn't belong." She considered leaving. This wasn't her world, and she had no desire to be part of it. But then she overheard something that stopped her. "I still can't believe we're stuck at Hampton Gardens," Victoria complained loudly. "Daddy says the owner is some tech nouveau riche who probably doesn't even appreciate what they have. If our family still owned it, at least the children's hospital will benefit," someone replied. "The venue donation is being matched by the guests' contributions." Victoria scoffed. "A tax write-off, nothing more. These new money people have no real class or understanding of philanthropy." Eleanor had heard enough. She stepped away, finding a quiet corner to make a phone call. "Thomas," she said when her financial advisor answered, "I want to make a donation, tonight, to the children's hospital mentioned in the wedding program. $50 million. There was a pause. "Eleanor, that's substantial. Even for you." "I'm aware. Process it immediately, please. And one more thing. Make sure the best man receives confirmation before his speech." When Eleanor returned to the reception, the dinner was ending, and the speeches were about to begin. She slipped into her seat, unnoticed by most, except for Victoria and her friends, who continued their not-so-subtle mockery. The moment that had frozen in the ballroom, Eleanor standing with her champagne trembling as Victoria's cruel words cut through the air, now continued as the best man's announcements silenced the room. "Eleanor not only donated the venue for today's celebration, but has just pledged $50 million to the Children's Hospital the newlyweds support." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's dropped glass shattered. Caroline's mother went pale. James stood from the head table, shock evident on his face. Eleanor hadn't wanted recognition. She hadn't planned this moment of revelation. But seeing the genuine surprise and gratitude on James's face, she realized sometimes visibility mattered. Sometimes the quiet generosity she preferred needed to be louder, not for her sake, but for others who might be standing in corners, feeling unworthy because of their clothes or background. James crossed the room, taking Eleanor's hands in his. "You own Hampton Gardens? You're the tech billionaire." Eleanor smiled slightly. "I prefer innovator." Why didn't you say anything? All these months. Would it have changed anything? She asked. Would your future in-laws have treated me differently if they'd known my net worth? The answer was written on his face, and they both knew it. I didn't come here for recognition, James. I came because your family showed kindness to a girl who had nothing. That matters more than all of this. She gestured around the opulent ballroom. As words spread through the reception, the atmosphere shifted palpably. People who had ignored Eleanor suddenly found reasons to approach her. Business cards appeared. Investment opportunities were mentioned. Victoria attempted an apology that sounded more like justification. Eleanor received it all with the same quiet dignity she'd shown when being insulted. She neither rejected nor embraced her sudden popularity. She simply remained herself, the girl who had learned early that character transcended clothing, that kindness outlasted cruelty, and that true worth had nothing to do with wealth. Later in the evening, Caroline approached Eleanor, without her mother or cousin nearby. I didn't know, she said simply, about Hampton Gardens, about who you were. James told me you were an old friend, but not the kind of friend you expected, Eleanor finished for her. Caroline had the grace to look ashamed. I should have made you feel welcome regardless. I'm sorry. Eleanor considered the bride. Do you love him, James? The question seemed to surprise Caroline. Of course. Then that's what matters. The rest is just decoration. Eleanor gestured around the lavish venue. Beautiful decoration, but still not the heart of things. As the night wore on, Eleanor found herself in conversation with an elderly gentleman who had been quietly observing the evening's events unfold. Quite the revelation you caused, he remarked, his eyes twinkling. I haven't seen the Ashton Pierces this flustered since their hedge fund collapsed in '08. Eleanor smiled politely. That wasn't my intention. No, I don't imagine it was. He extended his hand. William Hargrove. I was James's father's business partner before I retired. Eleanor shook his hand. You knew James when he was young? I did. Good boy. Always stood up for others. I remember him mentioning a neighborhood friend. Bright girl with big ideas who didn't deserve the hand she'd been dealt. That was you, wasn't it? Eleanor nodded, surprised James had spoken of her. He said someday you'd change the world, and everyone who underestimated you would regret it. William chuckled, though I don't think he imagined quite this level of success. I didn't do it to prove anyone wrong, Eleanor said. The best accomplishments rarely come from that motivation, William agreed. Tell me, with all your success, why maintain such a low profile? Most in your position would be on magazine covers, hosting galas. Eleanor considered the question. I saw what wealth and status did to people, how it changed them, separated them from reality. I wanted to succeed, but not become that. She gestured subtly toward Victoria, who was now desperately trying to engage with tech industry guests. A wise perspective. William nodded thoughtfully. Though visibility has its merits too. Young women with backgrounds like yours need role models. Sometimes the quiet approach, while admirable, doesn't create the change we wish to see. His words stayed with Eleanor as the reception continued around her. She had built her empire in the shadows, partly from strategic choice and partly from the habitual self-preservation of someone used to being overlooked. But was there value in stepping into the light? In letting girls like her younger self see what was possible? As the evening wound down, Eleanor found herself back in conversation with James and Caroline. What happens now? James asked. Will you disappear back into your anonymous life? Eleanor smiled. Not entirely anonymous, just focused on what matters. The Children's Hospital is naming their new research wing after you, Caroline said. They called during the reception, said a donation of that magnitude couldn't go unrecognized. Eleanor hadn't expected that. Recognition had never been her goal. James studied her expression. You don't want the attention. It's not about what I want, Eleanor replied. Maybe William was right. Maybe visibility matters sometimes. As guests began to depart, Eleanor observed Victoria and her mother in intense conversation with Mrs. Ashton Pierce. Their gestures were apologetic, urgent. Eleanor didn't need to hear their words to understand. They were in damage control mode, realizing too late the consequences of their cruelty. Mrs. Ashton Pierce approached Eleanor with a completely transformed demeanor. "Miss Bennet, we would be honored if you would join us for brunch tomorrow. A small gathering of family and close friends." The invitation was transparently motivated, but Eleanor saw James watching the exchange and knew her response mattered. "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Ashton Pierce. Unfortunately, I have other commitments, but I hope you enjoy your time at Hampton Gardens." Her tone was polite but firm. As the woman retreated, James approached. "You turned down the infamous Ashton Pierce brunch." "No one does that." Eleanor smiled. "I really do have commitments. A meeting with my foundation about educational scholarships for kids from our old neighborhood." "Of course you do." James laughed softly. "You know, when we were kids, I always thought you'd do something amazing. You had this determination." "You were the only one who thought so," Eleanor reminded him. "Then everyone else was blind." He hesitated. "I should have stayed in touch. We took different paths, but ended up at the same wedding." James smiled. "Life is strange that way." As the night ended and Eleanor prepared to leave, she paused to look back at Hampton Gardens illuminated against the night sky. She had purchased this estate because it represented something she had once thought unattainable, not just wealth, but belonging. Yet standing here now, she realized she had never needed to belong to this world. She had created her own. The following morning, Eleanor's phone rang incessantly. News of her $50 million donation had leaked to the press. Her PR team was in crisis mode. Journalists wanted interviews. Investment firms wanted meetings. Social invitations flooded her inbox. Eleanor ignored them all, sitting instead in her modest apartment, reviewing applications for her foundation's scholarship program. Each application represented a young person with potential but without opportunity, just as she had once been. A text message from James appeared. "The family is in shock. Victoria asked for your contact info to apologize properly. I didn't give it to her." Eleanor replied, "Thank you." Another message followed. "You changed more than just the children's hospital last night. You changed perspectives." Perhaps that was enough, Eleanor thought. Not the revelation of her wealth, but the reminder that worth wasn't measured by designer labels or family names. That kindness mattered more than status. That the girl in the simple blue dress, once mocked, now admired, had always been the same person. Her assistant called. "The tech conference wants you as their keynote speaker now. They're offering a substantial donation to your foundation." Eleanor had declined their previous invitations, preferring to work behind the scenes. But William's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes visibility created change. "Tell them I'll consider it," she said, surprising herself. Later that day, Eleanor visited the children's hospital that would now bear her name on its research wing. As she walked through the pediatric ward, no one recognized her. Just a woman in simple clothes with no entourage or fanfare. She sat with children who didn't care about wealth or status, who saw only someone taking the time to read them stories and hear their dreams. In their eyes, Eleanor saw what had always mattered most: the connections that transcended social hierarchies, the kindness that outlasted cruelty, and the worth that had nothing to do with wealth. One young girl tugged on Eleanor's sleeve. "Are you important?" she asked innocently. Eleanor considered the question. "I'm just someone who found a way to help. That's all any of us can do." As she left the hospital, Eleanor's phone buzzed with another message from James. "Caroline wants you to know her family is making a matching donation to your foundation. Not because of who you are, but because of what you showed them." Eleanor smiled. Perhaps this was the true power of her position. Not the wealth itself, but the ability to change perspectives, to challenge assumptions, to remind people that kindness and character transcended all else. The simple woman who had been mocked at a millionaire's wedding had never needed their validation, but by stepping briefly into their world, she had chanced it, and perhaps in some small way made it better. And that, Eleanor decided, was worth more than all her billions.